Welcome to the D-Spot podcast. Dr. Dana McNeil is a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in working with couples using the Gottman method. Her evidence-based practice provides support for the wide range of relationship issues that modern couples face. By using her open, affirming, and outside-of-the-box thinking, Dr. Dana is able to approach her work with couples by bringing both insights and tools that reflect the realities of today's complicated relationships. Dr. Dana features guests on her podcast that include a unique array of celebrities, CEOs, influencers, and everyday folks who are all working on navigating new conversations about how society views what goes into a successful relationship. And now, here's your host, Dr. Dana McNeil.
Hello, this is Dr. Dana McNeil with the D-Spot podcast. I am very excited today to have as a guest Dr. Ari Tuckman. He is a psychologist, a certified sex therapist, author, and an international speaker. He specializes in ADHD and relationships. So I love that he has a niche within a niche. He is also the author of 4 books, not 1, not 2, 4 books, including his most recent that I'm very excited to talk about today, which is called ADHD After Dark, Better Sex Life, Better Relationships. Hi, Ari, welcome.
It is so great to be here.
I'm excited. I was just telling you, I saw you at a conference recently and you're just so down to earth and relatable. And I'm like, you're my people. I want to know you. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. Okay. So let's start at the beginning. How did you decide not only to be a couples person, but also to deal with ADHD? What does that journey look like?
Yeah. So, it actually kind of went the other way. So when I came out of grad school in the late 90s, I was kind of fumbling around trying to figure out, like, what am I doing here? Like most people do.
Yeah.
And I sort of settled on ADHD in adults, which was really a bit of its sort of, underserved population at that time. It's better now. We're not awesome. We're not killing it, but it's better than it was in the late 90s.
Yeah.
So, I did a lot of work with the adults with ADHD who just, were looking for providers who really understood it beyond just the basics. And from there, I sort of evolved into the couples part, because obviously, right, we bring ourselves to everything we do, including our relationships.
We don't have a Teflon bubble around our mental health stuff. Okay.
Yeah, much to the disappointment sometimes of our partners. So like ADHD absolutely affects how someone relates to their romantic part. It's just not just about math homework. It's not just about, boring meetings at work. It's also about how you do at home, and not just with this sort of, logistical stuff of who remembered to call the dentist to schedule the kids' appointments, who loaded the dishwasher, but also like some of the emotional and the other kind of relational stuff of like, can I count on you? Do you pay attention? Do you listen when I tell you things? Do I feel like, we are working well together and we're on the same team? Like that part of it as well. So it all gets very, nuance. It gets complicated like relationships do, but I think it's also incredibly interesting. And I think it's also really satisfying work to do.
I love all that. And so let's back up for those of us that don't understand what ADHD is, because that is like half the clients that I have who are in a relationship with someone, right, that has that or has been identified as that. If somebody has, let's say somebody has ADD versus ADHD, what do you tell them is the difference, number one, to educate them about that?
Yeah. So, so technically ADD is the old term. This is where it gets confusing, right? The newer, which isn't really that new anymore, term is ADHD, but it's sort of, there are a couple subtypes. There's actually 3 subtypes. So the folks who are sometimes called ADD only have the inattentive symptoms. So they struggle with things like getting organized, time management. They tend to run late. They tend to be big procrastinators, distracted, forgetful, misplaced things, right? But not necessarily hyperactive and impulsive. Then there are the folks who just have this sort of hyperactive, impulsive symptoms. Usually those are kind of younger kids who are just not old enough for us to realize they're not very attentive. And then there are the folks who have the more combined, where they have that restlessness, which usually is more obvious in kids. It tends to settle down as an adult. But if you're an adult who has that more combined type of ADHD, you're probably not working an office job where you sit at a desk 40 hours a week. I don't know, I have a friend of mine where like, if you want to torture him, make him sit on the beach for 3 hours and do nothing, So maybe impulsive, which certainly could be things like blurting things out or saying stuff. It might also mean spending money impulsively, might also mean, infidelities or other sort of, sexual things. Because let's face it, sexuality is pretty fun and exciting. So, but not every fun and exciting thing should be acted on at every moment. So, they may sort of get themselves into trouble that way as well. So, but I mean, bottom line, ADD, ADHD get used interchangeably, although it's the inattentive symptoms that often sort of fly under the radar. Like everybody knows who the hyperactive kid is, right? We all know who's kind of bouncing around and whatever. But especially if you're smart, if you're likable, if you're willing to put in extra hours at school or at work, if you're female, you can fly under the radar a whole lot longer. So I have folks in their 30s, 50s, 70s, who come in finally being diagnosed, and they've had ADHD their whole life, but nobody sort of somehow saw it. Well, they saw it, they just didn't label it as ADHD.
And so that leads to another question. I have quite a few clients and friends who've been saying to me lately, what's this adult onset ADHD? Is it that they had it all along and nobody was looking for it because they flew under the radar, or can we develop it later in life?
Yeah, that's been sort of, it's an interesting thing that's come out in the research in the last, let's say, 5 years. So, it's always been one of those things that by definition, ADHD is lifelong. So if you're 30 and you have ADHD, you also had it at 10. Now, obviously, the demands upon a 10-year-old are different than the demands of a 30-year-old. So, what I often see by the time someone comes into my office, it's because they hit the breaking point. I mean, and yours and everyone's, right? We don't go in when everything's great, right? We go in when I don't take my car into the shop when it's running well. So, but probably what happened is something changed, that the demands increased or the supports decreased. Certainly in the pandemic, everybody's working from home and scared to death and miserable, right? Like lots and lots of people hit the breaking point. But when they look back, it's like, yeah, no, I was always distracting, whatever, but it was fine. I could get away with it, or a baby shows up, or a kid moves from high school to college, which is a whole different universe, or someone gets a promotion, or someone, is now in a significant relationship. I mean, it used to be they'd stay an hour or two at work past when they should, because that's when it was quiet and they could really get things done. And now their partner is like, dude, where are you? Like, it's 7:30. Why are you still there? They're not paying you. You're donating time to your job. Please come home. Right. And now all of a sudden, like they see it more clearly.
And so for those clients that decide that they want to route and they're trying to explain to their partner why that feels helpful, because we have partners that are like, why do you need to take medication? Why don't you just focus harder? Or why don't you get up earlier? Or whatever the thing is, because they don't understand. How might they help explain to their partner why this is beneficial if they choose to go that route?
Yeah. So there's this famous saying that ADHD is not a disorder of knowing what to do. It's a disorder of doing what you know. And it's true, right? Folks with ADHD know all the things to do. And, sort of my add on to that saying is that, in fact, folks with ADHD know far better what to do because they've been told far more times what they should be doing. Right. So like they know they're supposed to show up on time. That's not like a novel concept. Nobody needs to write that down for them. But, it kind of becomes one of those things. If it was as easy as that, wouldn't they just do it? Right. Like, why would they be fighting over it? Why would they be paying a couples therapist to fight in front of them about it? Right. If it was as easy as just knowing it and just doing it. But, it's sort of, I mean, by the same token, hopefully, if someone's really depressed and can't get out of bed, hopefully no one is so insensitive as to say, well, you should just do it. So, but often the example that I use is the difference between knowing and doing. Losing weight is incredibly simple. Like it really is. You just take in fewer calories than you use, right? That's it. It's really just a matter of subtraction. So why is it so hard? Because doing it means making thousands of the right choices over a consistent period of time. It's exactly the same thing with ADHD. Knowing what to do is the easy part. It's the doing it, not once in a while, not here and there, But like most of the time in an ongoing way, that is the challenge. And of course, we ask for that consistency from our partners because they're not an acquaintance we met on a plane and then said goodbye to.
Yeah. What do you think is often like some of the breaking points for couples that come into your office and ADHD has been a part of their life? And is there one partner that's like, I can't do this anymore, you're not showing up on time, or we're having a child now? I mean, you said there could be lots of breaking points, but is there like something that you're seeing happen frequently that you're like, must write a book? Like, what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, for some people, it's sort of developmental stages, right? So like the birth of a child or a new job or moving into a new house or a pandemic, or like it's some external event that happens. For other folks, it's more of like an internal, okay, I'm just sort of done with this. Like, I can't keep doing this thing anymore, where there's this gradual shifting or maybe a sudden breaking point that the non-ADHD partner sort of reaches a point of feeling like, you know what, I'm bearing too much of the burden here. Like, I'm feeling burned out and resentful. I'm not happy with how things go. You're not stepping up in the ways that I want you to. And then I'm mad at you for it. So, and maybe even I don't like who I'm becoming. Like, I'm not this angry control freak, right?
Yeah.
That's not who I want to be in this relationship. Alternatively, the partner with ADHD might also feel like, you know what? I'm tired of always being the bad guy. Like, whatever I do, it's never good enough. And frankly, and sometimes they'll acknowledge this. And frankly, I don't even know that I agree with all these things that you're requiring of me. Like, might I have a voice and a vote on what we do around here? So, like neither of them is particularly enjoying it. And yet, if they show up in a therapist's office, it's because they've gotten stuck, right? They haven't been able yet to figure their way out of that roadblock.
So kind of walk us through what would a session where we're trying to get unstuck look like? I mean, obviously it's going to be different situations, but how do you start that approach with them?
Well, so, the first thing I want to assess for with a new client is to what extent are they actually managing their ADHD in the first place? And, unfortunately, well, I'll start with the good news. The good news is the medication that we have for ADHD, right? The old fashioned stimulants that have been around forever work really well. Like, generally speaking, they tend to be very effective in managing ADHD. They tend to have manageable side effects. They are not addictive. Like, they are just not addictive. That's a false thing in the media. If anything, it is untreated ADHD is a significant risk factor for substance abuse. Treating someone with ADHD with a stimulant reduces their substance abuse potential. So if they're not managing their ADHD that well, or, they saw their GP who put them on some marginally effective dose of medication a year ago, and they're like, I don't know, I guess it sort of helps, right? Like, my first thing is,
I just take it when I have a project to do and I don't take it other times. Right.
Okay. Which I'm sure their spouse feels really psyched about all the times they don't take it for their benefit. But
you're not as important as my project is what I take.
Right. Okay. Right. Exactly. You are so important to me, except for every other thing in my life. So yeah, I want to know, like, first thing, low hanging fruit. Let's really get your medication sorted out. Let's give both of you guys some good resources on managing ADHD so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So let's kind of address the ADHD specifically. Now, some of that also is, hopefully, it helps the partners kind of depersonalize this a little bit. You're not irresponsible. It's your ADHD.
It's a situation. It's not you. Yeah. You're not of bad character because I've accidentally been giving you that impression in my frustration, but it's a situation that we need to tackle as a team.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, we should also add in the flip side of it is you're not a control freak. It's that my ADHD makes you anxious, right? So it's not you and me. It's kind of like we're both in this together.
Yeah.
And from there, to begin to sort of shift the dynamic, right? To begin to balance the scales a little bit more, have the partner with ADHD step up and kind of like, in a legitimate way, kind of manage their share more effectively, have the non-ADHD partner begin to let some things go. But within that so that's the part that's maybe a bit specific to ADHD, but here's the universal that's common to every couple is what are we doing?
Mm.
Like, how do we negotiate the differences? What do you want? What do I want? Right. Some things are objectively true. Most things couples argue about are really more about preference and opinion. So how do we want this to go?
So
Right.
we're
Like how,
negotiating a compromise around our mental health issue.
yeah. And it's real, well, actually more broad, yes. And also more broadly, we're negotiating, how do we live together as two people?
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do we find the common ground in our preferences? How do we sort of stand our ground where we need to and also act with generosity, right? Because you're not going to get more than you give, right? Law of relationships. So, like where are the places you're like, all right, I'll take one for the team on that one, right? And again, to feel like you're kind of on the same team working together.
Okay. I love so I'm hearing you say, like, we can talk about, here's the boundaries of what I have available with my mental health issue. Here's the ways that you get your needs met. And we're going to find some sort of compromise about what are the things that are deal breakers for you. But let's start at what we have in common. We both love each other. We both want this relationship to work. There's some things that are, I heard at a conference recently, there's rubber ball things and there's glass ball things, right? Like this is one that you can just let go. It's not that big of a deal. Let it bounce versus like this one's real fragile for you. And we need to like give that some space in our relationship.
Nice. I like that. I like those analogies. So yeah. And I mean, to get even a little deeper about it, some of it is to have kind of deeper and more effective negotiations to really kind of resolve some of those as yet unresolved issues. So that means for the partner with ADHD, like don't make promises you can't keep. Right. Don't say, okay, honey, I will I won't be late from work anymore.
So that feels like placating to the partner that here's it because I'm not being taken seriously. It adds insult to injury. I had to ask you to want to show up on time and then you placate me. So it's a no-win situation. So I'm going to get defensive and we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. Or they believe it. And that's the other piece. It's like, why did you believe they're never on time? Why did you, when they promised you, why did you think they would? So let's really talk about this, right? I will make an effort to be more on time, or I'll send you a text if I'm not, or just like, look, I've had, this with some couples where it's like, look, I don't really decide my schedule, right? When I leave work depends on the stuff that's come in. So I can text you when I think I'm going to be done, but you can't hold me to it, right? So like the fact that this person is, unreliable in other ways doesn't mean that they can control their work schedule. I mean, some of us can, but some of us can't, so like, I don't know, I have a guy he's like an HVAC guy. Like his day is done when the work that got called in is done, right? And that could be 4, but it could be 8, right? He can't leave in the middle of a job, right? So that sucks for his, fiance, but that is the life you got when you married this guy, at least when he's in this field, right? So like, so I think that's part of it, is being willing to have those really honest discussions, being willing to tolerate the frustration or the uncertainty or the doubt, right? Because often the non-ADHD partner struggles a lot with that uncertainty. Like, I want to know when you're going to be home. I want to know what I should do with my schedule or what I should do with dinner. Are we eating together? I would like us to be able to eat together, right? Like, they're not completely unreasonable requests. They're just not managing them well in the relationship.
It sounds like the ADHD gets blamed for things that are just the normal course of a job these days that then fall under like, why are you talking to me about my ADHD? Why don't you talk to Jim Bob, my boss, about his scheduling stuff? But because I've done some behaviors in the past that feel consistent with this, now you lump everything under my responsibility.
Exactly. Right. Like that's the problem, whether it's ADHD or not, right? Like if you give your spouse too many easy targets, right, then that becomes the focus. Right. But what isn't then the focus is the rest of it, so like, let's say, in this case, this fiance who, wants her, the guy to be home on time because it's important to her to have dinner, but also, it's her sense of anxiety, it's her sense of control, or maybe she's not responding in good, productive, honest ways. Instead, maybe she's being snarky, or she gives him the cold shoulder when he comes home, or other kind of passive aggressive stuff. So she makes dinner for herself, but not him, or right. Like, so it would be easy to justify that based on her, the guy's behavior, except that's not the whole story, right? Like, she has options, she's making choices. How does she feel about how she responds? Is it getting her what she wants, right? So like, there's the parts we can't control, which is the dude's schedule, but then there's the rest of it that we do have some input on.
And it almost feels like it can get messy to the point of where if I'm the partner that's doing the passive aggressive behaviors or sulking or whatever, then I am treating myself as if I'm a victim of my partner's mental health issues. Right? Versus accepting the things I can't change, because there's a big component there that even with medication, this isn't going to be something that goes away. It's manageable. There's still going to be things that feel inconvenient, but I've got to accept the things I can't change about it and pick my battles so that I don't feel like I'm victimized by it.
Exactly. And that is the key to any happy relationship, right? And so even if let's say it wasn't the scheduler's issue, let's just say he's not that great, it's sort of within his control, but he's still kind of a bit, variable, or at least more variable than she would wish. So I think it's reasonable for her to expect him to put in some decent effort, right? I want to see that you're trying, right? We should all expect that of ourselves and our partners. But assuming he is, and it is indeed better, and he's taking his meds and blah, 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 but it's not exactly what she wants, right? Then that's, what you just said, that's where that comes in. I wish it was different, but this is what it is. What choices can I make here? How do I take care of myself without being resentful of you?
And making an acknowledgement that it impacts my partner, right? It must be disappointing for you that sometimes I go off with the shiny, glittery thing that comes across my way. That must be frustrating for you. I want to acknowledge that for you. That doesn't mean I agree that I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean that I'm of bad character. I see that it has an impact on you and I'm willing to acknowledge it.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful. So how does ADHD impact our sex life? Is there some tips or some topics you want to share with us about that?
Sure. So the first way that ADHD impacts a couple's sex life is if your partner is pissed at you, they probably don't want to have sex, at least with you. Right. So
every client, yes.
yes, indeed. So, so managing kind of the boring stuff of daily life, working better as a team on the sort of business side of the relationship, right, sets a pretty good foundation for having a good sex life. And let's broaden that out to just feeling good about each other, enjoying each other. So there's that. There's also the part that, ADHD affects time management, it affects efficiency and organization. So even if the good feelings are there, sometimes the time isn't there, or if there's a workload imbalance in the couple, maybe the partner with ADHD is, has the time and is willing, but their partner is like, I don't have the time. I'm exhausted because I did all this stuff you didn't do. But so that's the sort of potentially negative side. But, the sort of positive side of it is in the survey research I did prior to writing the ADHD After Dark book, one of the things that I discovered, which I didn't predict, but totally wasn't surprised by, is that folks with ADHD tend to have greater what I call sexual eagerness, meaning that they're just sort of more attuned to their sexuality. They're more attuned to kind of sexual stimuli. So they're, more interested. They have a higher desired frequency of sexual activity. They tend to masturbate more. They look at porn more. They get turned on more easily. They tend to rate themselves as kinkier. So, across, 10 different dimensions. So, in a long-term relationship where that spark often fizzles, that's important, right? Somebody's got to keep the flame alive. Somebody's got to keep the partners kind of showing back up in bed, not just to sleep. So just like having a happy relationship in general sets the stage for having a better sex life, also having a good sex life feeds energy back. It feeds goodwill and generosity and joy back into the relationship. So they're both important, and you can't improve one without also improving the other.
In some ways, someone who has ADHD might then actually have more awareness of the value of keeping sex life alive. Like they don't get as dormant. That's Windsor in the background. They don't get as dormant as some of us might get because it's just more forefront for them. So in some ways, they're actually helping protect their relationship by continuing to like address that and bring it up.
Exactly. And that is exactly right. And whether it's sex or just, you know what, put the dirty dishes aside, let's just do something fun together, right? It's like a happy couple does a good job of balancing the work side of life and the fun side of life. You can't do too much of one or the other. Where couples struggle is when it becomes sort of polarized. It becomes too much where one partner is all about the work and the other is all about the fun. And then they get into debates and tug of wars about what are we doing here? And each one feels like the other is too much, like, either you're too irresponsible or you're a stick in the mud, right? And then they're not on the same team at that point. So it's okay to have one person who's a bit more of a specialist in the work or the fun, but still you got to be able to work well together. You got to know when to lead and you got to know when to follow.
Great. Those are great tips. I am like really now into this. Like I want to go read all your books. I already read one of them. I want to read all your books. I think this is really helpful. You did a really nice job of like normalizing it, right? Not making it feel too clinical, not making one person feel like they're the bad guy. I appreciate that. Do you have any last tips for us? I know I need to let you go back to your life. I could keep you here all day. Any tips for us to take away from kind of your expertise in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this all day. I think this is really great stuff. So, I mean, the advice that I would give is if you suspect that you or your partner have ADHD, then get a real look at it. If you have a kid or another genetic relative with ADHD, give a second look because the odds are much stronger, right? ADHD is pretty genetic. So odds are much stronger that you might also have ADHD. And if you feel like your ADHD is not being well managed, either in terms of medication or, isn't quite right, it's not really clearly effective, or if you're you need better strategies, if you need any strategies, if you need to use strategies, if you want your partner to use more strategies, there's a ton of really good information out there in the world of ADHD. I've got some stuff on my website, adultadhdbook.com, but I'd also send you to chadd.org as well as add.org. So those are the two ADHD advocacy organizations that have a ton of resources. So like there is no need to stumble in the dark, right? There's a ton of information out there. You just got to go find it.
Great. We'll put those in the show notes if people want to locate that. So where's the best place to find you and to find your books if they're interested in reading them?
I mean, best place is that adultadhdbook.com. And I've got stuff on the books and I've got recordings and all sorts of stuff.
Lots of trainings and lots of resources. Yep. Okay, good. Thank you, Ari. This has been amazing. And you are just as smart as I thought you were going to be and just as easy to talk to. So thank you for sharing because there's, this is a big deal. This impacts a lot of us. And so having a resource that's approachable, that doesn't make me feel like I need a PhD to understand what's going on is really a nice gift to give. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm always happy to spread the gospel. So thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
This has been the D-Spot Podcast with Dr. Dana McNeil. To learn more about Dr. Dana's practice, simply visit us at www.danamcneil.com.